Welcome to the Over the Hump podcast. Your gateway to the world of the iconic Brahman breed of cattle. At BRC Ranch, our passion for Brahman cattle runs deep. Join us as we delve into the heart of this extraordinary breed, unveiling its rich history, exploring industry trends, and sharing captivating stories that define the American Brahman. BRC Ranch stands as the pinnacle of Brahman excellence in America, boasting a decade-long legacy of champions and housing the finest Brahman bulls worldwide. It's not just about cattle, it's about a legacy that reverberates across ranches and hearts. Brought to you by BRC Ranch, where the Brahman legacy thrives and stories are woven into the very fabric of ranching. This is Over the Hump. And now your hosts, Brendan Cutrer, Rachel Cutrer, and Keaton Dodd.
Hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of Over the Hump podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Cutrer, and today I have had the pleasure of visiting with Tyler Salazar, who is the president of the Eastern Brahman Breeders Association and one of the Brahman breeders in South Carolina. And we had a wonderful conversation where we talked a lot about how she and her family got into the Brahman breed just 3 years ago, some of the activities of the EBBA, and just general thoughts on welcoming new breeders and new people into the breed. So we hope you enjoy this episode of Over the Hump. Today, I'm really excited to have one of my favorite other women Brahman breeders, Tyler Salazar from Hopkins, South Carolina. So welcome, Tyler.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so I was trying to think back when we officially met. I would say it was maybe 2 years ago. Is that right?
That sounds right. I think it was right before Houston.
So I think I mentioned you're the newly elected president of the Eastern Brahman Breeders Association, which y'all have a lot of really cool stuff going on, which we can talk about. But first, I would like to hear the story of your own family's operation and how y'all got started, and just a little bit about that. I mean, y'all have got, how many Brahman breeders are there in South Carolina? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I think there are probably 30 or 40. There are a decent number that are members of the EBBA right now. But we, as you said, we're in Hopkins, South Carolina. My mother and her sister actually grew up here. And my grandfather has been farming hay and breeding horses for as long as I can remember. And that is what my mother and her sister grew up doing. So we were a very, very agriculturally motivated family since way back then. She ended up going to school to become a vet. She went to University of Georgia, met my father, who has 2 degrees in animal science from UGA. And they met and fell in love, got married, and shortly after I was born, they both got jobs and moved to Florida, which is where our farm was and where I grew up. And pretty much through my childhood, we bred and showed quarter horses. My mother focused a little bit more on hunter under saddle. My father was more into Western pleasure. I was never one for speed, so I liked the Western side of things a lot better as well. But we were doing that for a long time. Eventually, though, we transitioned into cutting horses, which was my first real up-close exposure to cattle and to Brahman. Because whenever we would go to friends' farms just to either help them work their cattle or get practice on our horses, I remember a number of them, especially in South Florida, would always have the picturesque big Brahman bull out in the field with all of their cows getting bred. And so that is a picture that just stuck in my mind forever. I loved the look. I loved the intrigue. I loved the reputation of them being a little bit more difficult to handle, but we unfortunately never got to have Brahmas when I was a child. We mostly did backgrounding of heifers. So we would bring them in, we would work our horses on them, we would let them put some weight back on and take them back to the sale barn. And most of them were Brayford and Brangus crosses. Well, I ended up going to college, and my parents transitioned out of horses. We sold the farm. I ended up moving to Maryland, which is where I met my husband in 2015. And my parents packed up and moved to the beach. Well, COVID happens. I am in Maryland with my husband, working my 9 to 5 in DC, commuting back and forth. And my parents are at the beach, sitting in the sunshine and bored out of their minds because they are not handling isolation well. So my grandfather, who had the farm in Hopkins, still was farming, never stopped. They decided to go up and just help him with some management tasks and just with keeping up with the day-to-day. He has had a small herd of cows, mostly for tax purposes, but, he enjoyed having them. And my parents got hooked, and within about 2 weeks of everybody being on lockdown, my parents were back in the cattle business. It was about 6 months later when my husband and I had basically all but decided that our retirement plan was that we were going to move to South Carolina and start our own ranch. And that was about the time that I got the call that we were no longer going to be required to be in the office anymore. And so I called my boss at that point. I was a contractor and was like, hey, so, government contractors are no longer required to be in the office. Do I have to live here or can I move? And my boss was gracious enough to be like, I know where your heart is. You want to be closer to your family, go ahead. So yeah, me and my husband packed up and moved down here, and we got our first couple of Brahmas, and they're like M&Ms. You can't have just one.
There's so many interesting things that I pulled from that. Like, really, the first one was that your mom was a veterinarian. That's super cool.
Yeah, she has been a practicing small animal vet for a long time, and she still practices a little bit. She's mostly part-time, though, but between her background in small animal medicine and Dad, if I get your degrees wrong, I'm so sorry. But I believe that one of Dad's degrees is in bovine reproduction specifically. So between the two of them, we have a very, very strong agriculture and animal knowledge base to kind of operate as our backbone.
That makes a lot of sense. Your production values that I know y'all hold very important in your operation. That makes a lot of sense now, understanding that. You said y'all heard the reputation of Brahmins was difficult to handle, but I'm also going to say anybody who follows you on social media can definitely see that yours are not difficult to handle at all.
That's the truth.
Yeah. Did y'all find that as a challenge, or were y'all, specifically looking for really gentle cattle? I mean, because like almost every picture you have, it you and a really gentle Brahmin animal,
A requirement for our farm is docility. And a primary reason for that is my grandfather still works with us on the farm. He's 83 years old, and he needs to be able to be safe going in and out of the cow pens. And we have a bunch of family, both blood and adopted, that come through and like to see the babies and get to know the cows. And so it was just really, really important for us to make sure that we could do all of that safely. And it's just part of why we do this is because we enjoy it. And so we want to have cattle that we enjoy being around and aren't scared of. So that was really the top priority for us. Now, I will say, even though the reputation was always that Brahmas were more difficult to handle, we learned very, very quickly that they were not dissimilar to women, where it's better if you ask for permission to do things. You're not just going to tell them what they're going to do. It's a discussion. And, if they like you and they see the reason in it, then they're going to do it. And if they don't see the reason in it, then you're not going to make them.
That is a very good analogy. What is the climate like in Hopkins, South Carolina?
Very hot.
Okay, even winters?
Winters, we've been a little bit more mild. Typically, we've been a little bit warmer than Texas, at least what I've been tracking. The coldest that we tend to get out here is we may hit a low of 29 a couple of nights during winter, but highs usually stay within the 50s. And then summers, triple-digit days are not uncommon, and we tend to fluctuate pretty heavily between drought and daily thunderstorms. So there's a lot of back and forth as far as what the weather may be one week versus the next. And we've found that Brahmas have done really, really, really well for us, especially in the dry and hot months, because we not only do we do Brahmas, but we also raise Cimbras, Brayfords, and we have a commercial beef herd that we sell beef from. And we have a multitude of pictures of us going out in the middle of July, and all of the commercial cows and the Brangus cows are hiding in the shade, and those purebred Brahmas are out in the sun, and they do not care. They're out grazing. They're working on gaining weight. It's incredible to see, and the condition of our cattle, having that Brahma influence and having the purebred Brahmas in their herd have made a huge difference.
So I guess officially, how long would you say you've been in the Brahman business? 3 years?
We got our first Brahman the fall of 21. So we're coming on 3 years.
I would love to hear your thoughts and experience of the journey as a new Brahman breeder. If you would kind of share that with us, and because you have really came on the Brahman scene in a strong way. I mean, considering you were just getting your first Brahmins 3 years ago, and now you're the president of one of our regional associations. That's a lot in a short period of time. Kind of walk us through that journey, and, any tips you might have for new breeders or words of wisdom in your experience.
Sure. Yeah. The primary thing that I found most advantageous when starting is remembering that I would venture to say 98% of the people who are raising Brahmins right now are doing so because they genuinely love the breed. It is not an easy lifestyle by any means, and so they are doing it because they love it. And if you ask a cattleman about their cows, they are more than likely going to be over the moon to talk your ear off about them. So the best advice that I could give would just to take the steps, friend some folks on Facebook, maybe even go to your local Brahmin sale if you have one near you, and just go and walk through the pens and talk to some of the people who've consigned their lots and see what they have learned, what tips that they have. Where we got our very first Brahmas, my husband and I had purchased 2 bred cows from Grant Vassberg over at Callion, and we were waiting on them to get bred so that they could be delivered in November. Well, my father and I had some F1s that we were taking to Alabama for a sale. I cannot remember the name of the sale for the life of me, but it was one that Philip Gilstrap had put on. And that was one of my first experiences being around a lot of Brahman breeders for an extended period of time, even though we had just brought F1s. And so I think me and my father spent 2 days walking through the lots, talking to every single person who had cattle there. We found out which the docile ones were and who the retired show cows were. And I may or may not have frustrated some people because I was sneaking range cubes in my jacket pocket and feeding through the gates, which, looking back, probably not the best life choice, but it worked at the time. The cows knew me, and that was all I wanted. But just the insight that we gathered from some of the folks at that first sale regarding making sure that you knew your foundation sires and doing that research on your really, really just historical studs to, hey, make sure that you're investing in something that's got good feet and good udders, because if you don't, you're going to have a real bad time from the start, was just priceless. And it turns out that we actually brought a Brahmin home that weekend. And that was the first one that actually came on premises. So she is very special. But yeah, the big thing is just talking to people. There'll be a couple of folks that are too busy or won't want to give you the time of day, but those are very few and far between. So just making those connections, I cannot emphasize enough.
So for me, I think most of us, when we're getting into a new something or we're like, going down the rabbit hole of a new topic that we're interested in, the first thing I'm going to do is go like stalk people on social media and just kind of like go down the rabbit hole and see what you can find. And I guess I would say, would you have any observations of, I mean, obviously I'm not asking for names, but do you feel like the public perception of a lot of Brahmin breeders on social media is accurate for what you experience when you're a new breeder coming to an event for a first time? Or did you feel welcomed? Did you feel like it was hard to fit in? Anything like that?
It was a lot more welcoming than I expected. So we came from the quarter horse world, and a lot of the big name quarter horse trainers felt very unapproachable and untouchable in some ways. I was very, very pleasantly surprised getting to meet you and Brandon for the first time at Houston, and getting to go to JD Hudgens for the first time, getting to meet the Englands for the first time. All of those names are so strong, and the farm presences are so professional and put together and just intimidating. But really, they're people who really like to talk about cows too. And I was expecting a little bit more aloofness, but I was overjoyed with what I found.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And like you said, well, for me, I can talk about cows all day long. And then I also found it really interesting when you said about making sure you're buying the bloodlines that I guess are desired or marketable, because that's one I don't want to say a trap that I find new breeders getting into, but every bloodline basically has like a bell curve of its popularity. When a new sire comes out and then calves are being born and then they're like increasing popularity, increasing. And then every sire, every bloodline, no matter who it is, they do reach a point where maybe they do start to lose some popularity just because types are changing and better genetics have come out. So we always want to, when we're investing in something, we want to invest when we're on the upside of the bell curve and not the downside, because even if you're buying genetics right now, it could be, depending on the age of the animal, it could be even 2 to 3 years till you're actually marketing those genetics as your own. So that's really cool that you felt like, there was opportunities to learn that and, get advice and stuff like that. What were some of the first events? I mean, I know you mentioned that sale in Alabama, but some of the first events that y'all went to when you were getting in the breed?
So we went to the sale in Alabama. We went to, a couple of months prior, we went to the Carolina Brahman Breeders sale up in Lawrence. And shortly after that sale in Alabama was actually when we went to the EBBA's Christmas Classic. And that was the very first cattle show that I had ever been to. And that was life-changing. And it was one of those, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I had met Sienna Briles one time before then, and she had invited me and my parents to come and just come watch the show and meet people and be able to network some. And that was whenever the show was in Calhoun. It was the first Christmas Classic they had, I believe. And it was a one-day junior show, one-day open show, and we got to meet so many good and just gracious folks there that were excited to talk about the cattle they brought. We met Hollow Oak Farm there, who live in Cross Hill and have been very, very dear friends to us ever since. And that was kind of the moment where I realized that the EBBA was something that I was going to be a part of long term, because I got there and the environment was so welcoming and the cattle were amazing, and I was hooked.
I mean, that's a really good transition into talking about the EBBA, because you mentioned Sienna, who we have mentioned multiple times as just a beacon of light in our breed, I would say. And I mean, Eastern Brahman Breeders Association, y'all have got things going on. I mean, not that there's a contest of most active like affiliate, but if there was, y'all would be right up there at the top.
Thank you. We are trying our best.
Yeah, I mean, really just the growth in that area. I mean, I don't have the figures. I don't have any figures in front of me, but it seems like there's new breeders getting in the breed just constantly. What states do y'all cover?
So we cover ABBA areas 11 and 12. So that is Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and all the way up the East Coast. So we're pretty much everything east of the Mississippi except for Florida.
Yeah, which is, I mean, huge area for Brahman and Brahman cross cattle.
It really, really is. And we have, I believe we're up to 175 members right now, with just over 60 junior members. So we've been really, really fortunate with the growth that we've had. And our board members at large this year are absolutely incredible and have really taken the reins with regards to event planning and general day-to-day, as well as brainstorming new ideas for how we can help promote the breed in this area for both crossbreeding as well as performance and show purebred breeding. So it's been a ride, but really, really excited to be on it and really grateful for everybody that we've met along the way.
So do you recall when that organization started? Or, I mean, maybe it's been around a long time, but when did it really get going recently?
So it was actually founded in 2019. So it is not an old organization at all. Sienna Briles, who we've mentioned, was the founding president. And it started because she had become friends with a local junior show up in North Carolina, and they were interested in adding a Brahman breed show. So she got in touch with a regional Brahman organization over here and had asked for their help. And I'm not sure why or how, but they basically dismissed her immediately and told her they did not have time. She didn't know what she was doing. She was never going to make it happen, especially not in North Carolina. And so, you know Sienna. I know Sienna. Anyone who knows Sienna, she will tell you herself that her best and her worst quality is her stubbornness. And so she took that and it lit a fire under her. And the very next day, she started the Eastern Brahman Breeders Association, which at the time did not include Mississippi and Alabama, but it started then, and they had their very first EBBA extravaganza in September of 2019. And we became an incorporated 501c3 in 2022. So this past May, we just had our 5th EBBA extravaganza, which has been rebranded as the EBBA Extravaganza and Bonanza, or EXBO show, since we have moved to Perry, Georgia, and we've become a 2-day point show, which was so exciting for our area. And we had a judging clinic put on by Alex Pittman out of Mississippi State on Friday. And we had, I believe, over 80 juniors in showmanship on Friday night, and then over 300 Brahmas each day, Saturday and Sunday.
That's amazing. And I followed y'all's show a little bit. We've never exhibited there, but if I recall, every year y'all have to find a bigger venue because you fill up every facility you rent, right?
I can't remember where the very first one was, but I remember the third one we had ever done was I think we had done one in Calhoun, and then we grew out of that. We went to Rome, Georgia, grew out of that. Finally, we just decided we're going to pay up. Perry Fairgrounds are expensive, but it's a beautiful facility, and it's so well managed.
I mean, that probably is the premier show facility in the Southeast. There are like Breed Junior Nationals that host their show there, and y'all are right there with them. There's a quote, and I might not have it right, but it's basically something like, those who say it can't be done shouldn't get in the way of those who are already doing it.
That is Sienna to a T.
I guess we basically shut down and then care so much and have so much passion just to be like, no, I'm making this happen, and now look at where y'all are.
Absolutely. It's been fantastic. We've grown really, really fast, and it's been a little bit of a wild ride, and it's been a lot of late nights, but the folks make it worth it.
Brahman breeders know, you want the finest herd? You have to start with the finest Brahman bull semen, and there's no finer selection than at BRC Ranch. Our champion makers are exactly that, but we know variety is essential. We also offer semen from low birth weight bulls, polled/scurred bulls, and sexed heifer semen. BRC Ranch works to release orders within 3 to 5 business days, but you can always stop by the ranch to pick up your order too. Bring the top Brahman sires to your ranch. Go online to shopbrcutrer.com.
Y'all have a dedicated Facebook group, right? I'm not sure if I'm in it, but I think y'all have a really active Facebook group for Eastern Brahman, right? What's it called?
It is called the Eastern Brahman Breeders Association Networking Group, which that particular group, we allow posts from all over. So you don't necessarily have to be a member to be a part of the group. You can come in, you can advertise your cattle as needed. And then we also have the Eastern Brahman Breeders Association Facebook page, where we do most of our promotion of what we have going on and our events. And we also just started our Eastern Brahman Juniors Facebook group, which is specifically geared towards our junior membership and events and things that our junior members might be interested in knowing and keeping up with.
So one, I guess, criticism you hear a lot through the years is people saying they wish that the EBBA would help them market their cattle. And I have different opinions on that. I see the EBBA as a registry, like maintaining the registry and up to the breeders to market their cattle. But I see people's opinion. But where I'm going with this is EBBA, to me, really does help their members market their cattle. Because I think, do y'all have like a newsletter or like a private treaty catalog that y'all put together?
We do. We have both. So on top of the Eastern Brahman Breeders networking group, where folks can go on and share their cattle on Facebook, we also have a private treaty sales catalog, which we had done an issue of last year, but we got it going again this year and are planning on keeping it quarterly. Basically, anyone who is a member of the Eastern Brahman Breeders Association can submit a full-page advertisement for their cattle, whether it be a purebred Brahman, a commercial Brahman, a registered crossbred, a commercial crossbred, or even if they have something, an event that's coming up and they want to do a full-page ad promoting their farm, things like that. We have a PDF of the catalog that is published on issue quarterly. And we also have our Eastern Brahman Bulletin, which is our newsletter that goes out a couple of weeks before the catalog is posted, mostly to let people know about the goings-on within the organization, what we're working on, as well as reminding folks of deadlines for other initiatives such as the private treaty sales catalog.
And is that free for your members?
It is free. Yep. It is for all members.
Wow.
And the newsletter actually does get mailed out, whereas the private treaty sales catalog is online. But if I remember correctly, we did agree at our last board meeting that that was actually going to get mailed out as well.
So I just looked it up, and your annual membership to join EBBA is $25. So it sounds to me like you get quite a lot of value for your membership.
Yeah, our annual membership is $25. Our junior membership is free. And we have a bunch of irons in the fire regarding our junior members and junior organization, which we're so excited about. We're fortunate enough to actually have a junior market steer giveaway this year.
I've been seeing some of this on Facebook. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so John Scott McGill, who was actually the founding vice president of the EBBA and is in South Carolina as well, he was gracious enough to donate one of his F1 steers. It's either an F1 steer or a 3/4 steer. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But he was gracious enough to donate that market steer to the EBBA so that a junior could show it. And what we've done is we've constructed a contest where the junior has a list of questions that they can answer, from things from their name, where they are in school, to what the hardest thing about raising livestock is, what their favorite thing about raising livestock is, have they ever shown before? Because we really wanted to also allow applicants that this could be potentially their gateway into showing. We didn't want to just cater to the folks that have been showing for a long time. And they actually will submit a video of them answering these questions, as well as a letter of recommendation from a mentor or from a teacher. And we will go through and review the entries. And once that steer is weaned, the winner will have a steer for their project for the next year. So not only are we helping the youth out, but it's also getting eared cattle in these market steer classes that are basically overrun by Angus and Sim Angus over here. So we're very excited.
That was another question I wanted to ask you, is that even though Brahman is growing on the East Coast, I would guess it's still very much a minority breed compared to Angus or Sim Angus. Is that a fair statement?
Very much so. We're seeing a lot more crossbreeding than we have in years past. It's funny to be in this particular area of the East Coast because I'm actually getting to have conversation with cattlemen and seeing the changes real time, which is really interesting because a year ago, it was impossible to sell anything with ear. The most ear anybody wanted on anything was maybe a quarter Brahman. There were a couple of folks that wanted F1s, but it was a lot harder to sell.
Would this be like at a local auction barn or anywhere?
Now, I will say that you do get hit hardest at the sale barn over here, but historically it's been harder to sell Brahman influence over here. But as time has gone on, folks are starting to pick up now that, oh, even though the sale barn is docking us for having ear, a little extra leather, a little extra navel on our cattle, the hybrid vigor is more than making up for it in the body weight. And so they're actually on their own kind of coming to the decision of, oh, maybe a quarter or maybe a half Brahman isn't so bad. Maybe I can make money at the sale barns with that. And I don't have to worry as much about the ear really docking the valuability of my cattle. So we had actually our first commercial bulls sell for the first time recently. And a lot of those were 1/4 Brahmas or they were F1s. And I was stunned to see how many people just immediately were jumping on the opportunity to have these quarter Brahman bulls, where usually they would want there would be some interest in the quarter and F1 heifers, but overall people were kind of staying away. But now the tide has really, really shifted, and it's changing the perspective here a good bit.
Well, I mean, we experienced that even here. We have a herd of F1s, so they would be half-bloods, and we don't have a whole lot of half-blood bulls, but when we do, there's a market for them, which tells me that people are looking for the quarter blood or looking to produce quarter bloods and happy with the half-bloods. So, I mean, I think it's great, and it's just another market that our breeders can utilize and tap into. I know you're not super into showing, but you do show, occasionally. When you go to some of the shows, do you ever get a different reaction to people maybe seeing Brahmins for the first time in that area?
So I will tell you, the South Carolina State Fair is a entirely different experience. I've not been to a whole lot of state fair shows, but the ones that I have been at, South Carolina is pretty special because the cattle barns are actually located right next to the petting zoo and the chicken race, nope, they're not the chicken races, they're the pig races. And so they are a very, very popular spot to be. And the alleyways where people walk through are right behind your cattle, and they are so engaged and are constantly asking questions. I mean, there is not a moment during the state fair week where you are at the cattle barn and you are not talking to somebody about your cattle. And it is where the state fair, for those who don't know, are actually in Columbia, which is where the University of South Carolina is. It's not in and of itself a super rural area, even though there is a decent amount of farming all around Columbia. So you have a pretty wide berth of people whose parents might have raised cattle, but they don't now. You have people who do currently raise cattle. You have people who have never seen a cow before in their life and are trying to figure out what the camels that were crossed on donkeys were in order to make these Brahmas. It's like they have to have donkey because of the ears, but the camels, they're humps. And so it takes a little bit of convincing for some folks to recognize that they are, in fact, cattle. But the reception has truly been one with open arms, and they have been really, really welcoming, and it's a very, very fun show, even if it is a little bit exhausting just from the number of people who are so enthusiastic and want to figure out what these animals are that they have never seen before.
Well, we hear in history, like back in the days, 1900 something or another, when like J.D. Hudgens took their cattle to, I think it was J.D. Hudgens, took their cattle to Fort Worth or somewhere, and they wouldn't let them in the barn, and they just took their show string out there basically on the road to show people what Brahman is, and that was in Texas back in the day, but literally you're doing the same thing. You're just in South Carolina and it's 2024, but you're in like the heart of Angus country or Sim-Angus country, and you're showing people what our breed can do. And that's amazing. I mean, you're definitely making a big impact. And it shows because look at how y'all's membership is growing out there, and look at the new breeders that are out there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
I also want to give you an opportunity to brag and tell us how you placed at the South Carolina State Fair.
Oh, this was our second year showing at the South Carolina State Fair, and it was our first grand champion female and first grand champion bull.
I remember when I saw that come across Facebook, I was so happy for y'all because you've worked so hard. And again, to kind of get where y'all are in just 3 years, it's really a testament to, your family and your passion. I was so happy for y'all.
Thank you so much. That was a surreal week because the South Carolina State Fair is our hometown show. Our farm in Hopkins is about, I want to say, 20 minutes away from the fairgrounds. And we constantly have family and adopted family and family friends coming out and are curious about the cows. They know them all by name. And so getting to go show at the state fair, we have basically the entire town of Hopkins coming and filling up the stand and bringing signs. The judge was a little alarmed, I think, at the enthusiasm, but the fact that the community has really come together and is celebrating this breed of cattle with us, it just gives me goosebumps. It's been such an amazing experience.
I gotta ask, when did you first start showing? Did you show cattle when you were like a youngster in 4-H, or did you just start showing within the last 3 years, showing Brahman?
So we got our first Brahman in August of 2021. We bought a bred cow at that sale in Alabama that I told you about. My very first cattle show was the next June with that cow's bull calf.
So you didn't like grow up showing at your county fair when you were 10 years old?
Absolutely not. I did not. I had never been on the halter of a calf ever until that bull was born.
I really want to talk about this though, because I would think, I mean, as a grown up now, when I show, I even every time, I mean, I've showed a billion times, probably 20,000 times, but anytime I still go in the ring, I do feel a sense of, jitters, nervous-sided is what we call it. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Were you scared to start showing as an adult, or you just jumped right in, or what was it like?
Well, I honestly can't remember much from that first show because I think I blacked out for part of it. I feel bad. You were actually the judge for the very first show that I went to and showed at. And what changed, it was something that we've done ever since that show, because my little bull calf that I showed took first in his class, which blew my mind. We had no idea what we were doing. I didn't even know how to hold a show stick right, but we managed to get through it. And I was so nervous. I didn't hear anything you said about the reasons other than deeply muscled, nice bull. He's my big baby now. But so anytime we talk about that bull, it's always, deeply muscled, nice bull. And ever since then, we've always tried to get judge reasons on video, or at least on some kind of recording. So if that nerve excitement hits you too hard, you can always go back and listen to it. That is kind of a big tip that we learned. But as far as showing as an adult, it didn't register with me until maybe the third or fourth show, just how outnumbered I was and how much I really had to learn from the juniors around me.
But you said you were outnumbered by kids?
Yes.
Or by men? Or both?
Both, truly. But right around that time was the first time that I really started to get to know some of the juniors within the EBBA, because once I started showing more than one head, I was like, oh, okay, so I'm seeing the same people in these classes. This is cool. And of course, you're standing outside the ring, you start having conversations, and I was so impressed with how these juniors have matured and have such pride and confidence in their work. It was very much a case of it didn't matter how old I was or how old they were. I was ready to learn from them. And they were so more than willing to teach that it was a little unnerving, but at the same time, it was absolutely remarkable. And I'm so proud of our EBBA juniors. They're just some of the greatest kids in the world. And it's really an honor to be able to provide these shows and some of these educational opportunities that we're working on, and like this steer contest, in order to help them get on their way.
I've been in the Brahman breed my whole life, so 45 years. And I think that there may have been times in the history of our breed where people felt like the Brahman breed was maybe like a good old boys club or a country club, where if you, didn't if you weren't born into it or didn't have a, a certain name or brand, you weren't going to be welcomed. And I tell people all the time that's not true, that there is a place for everybody in today's Brahmin breed, today's Brahmin business, young or old, male or female, new or old breeder, big or small breeder, and y'all are just living proof of that because you're relatively new in the Brahmin breed. You're in a location that's kind of off the map geographically from, maybe your typical hub of a Brahmin. And, you're a young woman and you've been welcomed and you've quickly risen to the top, and that's what a breed needs to grow. That's what you've got to be if you want to keep growing and welcome new breeders. And it's a good story. It's a really, really good story.
Thank you. And I mean, I can't thank the EBBA enough for all of the opportunities that they've given me to both help as well as now man the helm in order to kind of give back to the community that's been giving me so much over the past 3 years. But I would strongly, strongly, strongly recommend to anybody who is getting started or just trying to find their place in this breed or in cattle in general, just go think a little bit smaller than your national organization. You said a little bit earlier that you feel like the ABBA is more of a registry than a marketing machine. And there's some truth to that. I can agree with that. There are some changes I would like to see, and I'm sure there are changes that many others would as well. But the amount of hands needed in order to make those changes in a smaller geographical area is much more manageable. And so, similar to the story with Sienna earlier, if they aren't building it for you, then you just got to build it yourself. And it's not always easy, but with the right people around, and again, most of this Brahmin crowd genuinely is here because they love the breed and they love cattle, you can really make a difference.
Yeah, you can, and y'all have shown that. Well, we're about to wrap up, but we like to ask a closing question of every guest. And the question is basically, I would say it could be phrased a couple of ways. It could be your favorite Brahmin of all time, or if you had any Brahmin animal like in history that you could go back and see, in person or like, personally know or anything like that, who would it be? And so do you have any that come to mind for that?
I've had one that has been my answer since episode 1 of this podcast, and I still stand by it. For me, I would be very hard pressed to name an animal that has had as much influence on the Brahmin breed as Elmo. I would love to go back and be able to actually see Elmo in person, because we know the stories of what his offspring has done in regards to size, masculinity, and reproduction and docility in this breed. And just being able to go back in time and see where it all started would be absolutely incredible. I mean, I loved Noble and I absolutely loved 279. I have some 279 calves on the ground right now that I adore. And so being able to see the common denominator between some of these lines that I've admired for so long, that would be the dream.
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, Elmo has got to be in my top list of, favorite bulls of all time too. I definitely remember the national show that he won, which would have been 2008, I believe, because 2010 was when 100 had won the national champion. And so when we were kind of concocting the plan of Noble, it was really recent. Like Elmo was the recent national champion 2 years earlier. You know, that bull was so gentle, just a beautiful bull, you know, when you would see him in the ring, and even when he showed, always a favorite. People loved that bull. He is definitely one of the great bulls of the breed. That was a good choice.
I've been sitting on that one for a minute.
That's amazing. Gosh, well, is there anything we missed? Any big stuff that we need to talk about from EBBA, or we cover it all?
I think we've covered most of it. As far as things that the EBBA has coming up, we have our Christmas Classic show that's coming up December 6th through 8th. It's going to be in Hattiesburg, Mississippi again. And that is a show that we actually host and we run ourselves. We also sponsor a number of shows in our area. For example, we sponsor the Tennessee State Fair, which is August 15th. We sponsor the Delta Fair that's in Memphis, which is September 2nd. And we also sponsor my hometown fair, the South Carolina State Fair, and that's going to be October 17th. And all three of those are going to be Brahman Open shows.
So we talked about EBBA. Now, if someone is listening and they're in the area near y'all and they would like to, you know, visit y'all's operation or purchase, you know, cattle or genetics from y'all, how do they get in touch with you? What's the process? Do y'all welcome visitors? I know you do, you know. Tell our listeners how to visit your operation.
Absolutely. So we do welcome visitors. If you're able to find me on Facebook, my name is Tyler Salazar on there. You're welcome to friend request me and ask me any questions that you would like. I am more than happy to talk about cows at any time. Our farm page is Palmetto Springs Cattle Company, and that's on Facebook. We also have a website that is palmettospringscattle.co. And any of those methods of communication are perfect for getting in touch with me. The EBBA has a website that's easternbrahman.com, and they also have a Facebook page that is the Eastern Brahman Breeders Association. And if you reach out there, you're probably going to get in contact with me too. Either way, I would be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Well, thank you so much, Tyler, for joining us. It has been a fun time visiting with you. I can't wait to see you again. And again, thank you for all you're doing to promote our breed out there on the East Coast, and it is very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor.
Okay, so thanks again, guys, for listening, and we'll see y'all next time on Over the Hump.
You've been listening to the Over the Hump podcast. Our passion is Brahman cattle, and it runs deep. And this show is about its rich history, industry trends, and stories that define the American Brahman. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram and Facebook at Cutrer. See you next time on the Over the Hump podcast.